there have been questions asked, and the purpose of the stories that have been told are to bring the possibility of answering those questions. But sometimes a story arises that is outside this purpose and has a purpose of its own. So even though this story allows us to see the laws of life at work, it has its own reason for the telling, and perhaps you can glean what that reason is after hearing it. A long time ago, in the great city of Prague, there was a very, very wealthy Jewish merchant, and he had the great good fortune to have a son who, it was found at a very early age, had super intelligence, great ability, not only to learn the scriptures of his faith, but he also had great wisdom. So his father, the merchant, immediately put him under the tutelage of the greatest rabbi in that great city. And he was trained and had great times debating with those learned pundits of that faith. But as is the custom, when this young boy, who was called Mordecai, was coming to the age of his early transition, that rite of passage that comes to all of us, but is demonstrated and acted out in different ways, he was coming to the stage of his bar mitzvah. And at that time, and as was the custom, it was usual for the fathers to then choose a bride, the wedding to take place in the future, for this son. But because of his son's super intelligence, the wealthy merchant did not want just any old girl, maiden, to be the wife of his potentially great soul. So he put the price of a dowry, which was beyond the means of anyone in the city of Prague. But as it so happened, there was an overseas merchant who came to Prague to do business with this merchant, and he was inordinately rich. And on one of his visits, he mentioned that he had a daughter that would be suitable bride for this great soul Mordecai. And of course he had the means to provide the dowry that was being asked. But on a particular visit, just some months before the rite of passage, the bar mitzvah, was to take place, the foreign merchant came and suggested to the father of Mordecai that he allow Mordecai to travel with him to his far-off place to meet his potential betrothed. Now the father was very loath to do this. First of all, to let his precious son to go to a far-off country that was not known to him. But he went off to the rabbi to ask his advice, and the rabbi said, "Oh, I think that's a very good idea. It would be very educational for him, but make sure that he's returned several months before his rite of passage." So the father of Mordecai received the assurance of the foreign merchant that his son Mordecai would be returned to Prague in time for his bar mitzvah. and he was allowed to travel to this far-off country. Now, when the foreign merchant and Mordecai arrived, Mordecai was surprised to see what was obviously a castle, a palace. But he was even more surprised when he entered the castle because it was entirely empty of people. There was no wife, there was no potential betrothed, there was not even a servant occupying the place. But Mordecai was a very respectful young man, and he made no comment about it. And he found that he was allowed to have the run of this castle, except for one room. But he found in none of the rooms was there so much as a book. Nothing to divert his attention. So he wandered the rooms of the castle day after day until finally, as the months wore on, he began to be very concerned, and in that time, to fill his time, he had written long letters to his father telling him of what was happening and how concerned he was. In fact, he told his father of a dream that he'd had before this journey took place, where an old man with a white beard and white hair had come to him to give him warnings. But nothing occurred, and finally Mordecai asked the merchant, well, when am I going to be allowed to go home, and where is my fiancé? And the merchant made the excuse that his wife and daughter were away in a foreign country and had taken the servants with them. But when the foreign merchant saw that Mordecai was becoming very anxious and a little afraid, and was therefore thinking that he might have a thought of escape, one day the foreign merchant took Mordecai up the flights of stairs, having taken care to lock all of the rooms in the castle, cutting off any means of escape, and took him to the one room to which he had not entered. And when they entered that room, Mordecai was amazed to see that every wall was lined with books, wonderful books on every shelf. So he was quite diverted looking at all of the titles of these books, which gave the foreign merchant the opportunity to slip out of the room and lock the door. Now, after a moment, Mordecai realized that he was captured in this room. But he was still quite preoccupied with the volumes on the shelves. But then, as he was about to take down a book of the great scriptures, he distinctly heard the sound of what could only be a sob. And when he looked around, there, on the table, on a velvet material, was a head. But to Mordecai's even greater surprise, the head began to speak. And it said, "Oh, I see that you have met my fate." Mordecai, after his great shock at having the talking head and realizing that it did not have a body, could only question. And the head explained, I too was a brilliant young man like you, and I have been captured by a demon who has used my intellect and my mind to its own ends. And then the talking head said to Mordecai, open one of these books. So Mordecai opened the volume that he had in his hand, the great book of the scriptures, and found that the sacred name on every line had been removed. And the talking head said, yes, the sacred name is placed under my tongue, so that I am forced to tell the future, to reveal secrets and truths that are used by the demon. And this they are able to do for 80 years, but I am coming to the end of my life, and this is why you've been captured. Because on the day of your transition, the day of your rite of passage, your head too will be locked and used in the same way as I have been used. And Mordecai felt a great surge of power enter into him and said, what can we do? How can I escape? And the head said, we must act quickly. You must do exactly what I tell you. And he said, take the book from the highest shelf, and there you will see it will open a passageway. But you must take me with you, because if you leave me behind, the demon will use me to find out where you are, and you will have no escape. So Mordecai tried to reach for the book at the top of the shelf, but he could hardly. He had to get a pile of books. Quickly, said the head. But as he pulled down the book from the shelf, a creaking sound opened a passageway. Mordecai quickly put the head under his arm and went into the darkness that was behind the opening. And he found himself on a stairway. And he said, how do these people live in the dark like this? And the head answered, they thrive in darkness. Quickly, this is a spiral, and there are 9 that we have to traverse. And then Mordecai was able to find his pattern, find his way through these spirals, and was able to comfortably, quickly go down until they reached the 7th spiral. And then the head spoke and said, we've been discovered. The demon knows that you've escaped. And in that moment, it seemed like a great abyss opened at Mordecai's feet, and he felt himself falling and falling. He could hardly hold the head that was under his arm, and it seemed that they were falling endlessly. And Mordecai shouted, what is happening to us? And the head said, our immortal souls are in the balance. Back in Prague, the tutor of Mordecai, the rabbi, had had a dream where a man with a white beard and white hair had come to him to tell him of the mortal danger of the soul of Mordecai. So he had quickly rushed to the merchant and told him that they must gather all of the Jews of Prague to gather together and pray for the soul of Mordecai. And this they did. They came from everywhere. The synagogue was filled to overflowing with souls, chanting, praying. And the rabbi could feel that there was something blocking there. And then all of a sudden, it seemed that the cries of Mordecai, because he and the head, as they spiraled down in this great abyss, were themselves making the great invocations that were part of their faith. And as those invocations met with the prayers of all that had gathered, something opened. The rabbi said, "Quickly, open the door of the synagogue." And when they did, there was the boy Mordecai standing with something under his arm. And there was great rejoicing. And of course, when Mordecai told the story, the head was taken with great reverence, and suitable rites were made, and a proper burial. Of course, what followed was the rite of passage that was there for Mordecai, and the future of Mordecai we already know. Over these last months, there have been many souls who have come to visit. Those souls have been confined in the illusory castle and held captive by their demon. When time of transition comes for each of us, and sometimes it's a common transition with all the rest of life, this is our rite of passage, and in them there is great danger, because our demon blocks the flow of energy that fulfills that transition and takes us into the next realm of being. Do you have such an illusory confinement? Do you have a demon that holds you captive? And having dealt with, as we have at other times, those gremlins that enter our life, that sabotage and have sabotaged our times of transition, do you now have the wherewithal to be able to help those souls who themselves are faced with this dilemma? And what would you do? What do you do? Is it simply as the gatherings of all of the great Jews of Prague coming together and pray? What is represented? What is the meaning of this in us? When someone rang Divine Mother, when they were having a great trauma in their life, she would say to them, "Put down the phone and I'll pray for you." Do we do that? What do we do? What is our job? But this story is given for what it's worth. Find in it what you will, in its many levels. Wherever you're at, it has something for you.